Hey guys, in this video I'll be comparing Phil Heath and Nick Walker. Specifically, I'll be using Phil's 2013 Arnold Europe version and Nick's 2024 New York Pro Physique. Before anyone comments that this is going to be, a blowout win for Phil, and that there's no point in doing this comparison, I wanted to simply say that I was wondering what the comparison would look like during class, and thought it would be fun to make. Sure, Nick might get destroyed in some poses, however, he may also shock you with his sheer size, freakiness, and conditioning in others. I also think this comparison will show us the difference that 10 years can make in the caliber of competition. Who do you guys have winning this comparison, and who do you think is freakier? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's begin this comparison. The front double is a strong pose for these two, however, they do have some minor yet glaring weaknesses. For starters, Phil is narrow across the shoulders, which hinders his overall width and stage presence, while Nick has a slightly wider waist and lackluster quad sweep. That said, both are extremely strong in the focal points of the pose, like in the arms, lats, and the details overall. Without saying much, I'm sure you've probably already realized that Phil is crushing Nick in the quads, the V-taper, and shape, as he looks more completely developed and far more aesthetic. While this is true, I do think that Nick is battling Phil pretty hard, potentially winning the triceps and outright taking the biceps due to those ridiculous peaks. For the overall pose though, I do think the missing outer quads and blocky waist do hold Nick back tremendously, and his shorter stature only makes him look more stout and compact. If he had better sweep and longer femurs, he might take this pose. However, as it is, Phil looks much more impressive in the legs, has a smaller, tighter midsection, and just as good if not better arms. The front lat spread is interesting since both guys are pretty weak in this shot. Phil is weak not only due to his narrow clavicles, but it also is due to his inadequate posing. I don't think that a flexed chest is ideal here, since it creates a more rounded off look for him that doesn't really suit his physique. He isn't the best in the silhouette or overall flow, however, neither is Nick, who looks just as unimpressive. For what it's worth, Nick has a more aesthetic chest and lat display, along with a cleaner presentation of the upper body minus the midsection. That said, the last part, the midsection, is clearly what throws off the pose, as it's under-detailed and extremely wide. His quads don't even look too bad compared to that waist, so it's a shame that he can't pull, this pose off that well. With all that said, I think that Nick objectively has the worst midsection, quads, and details upstairs, which leads him to place second behind Phil. I'm not a fan of either in this pose, to be honest, but there's no denying that Phil is denser in the chest, delts, arms, and legs, and has a good set of lats and a tighter midsection. The side chest is a rather close pose between these two, with Nick surprisingly pushing Phil in the side leg and arms. He's got massive arms like we saw in the last pose and in the front double, along with a grainy, dry, and rather large side leg as well. Unfortunately though, these are the only areas where Nick can even touch Phil, since Phil obliterates Nick in that full strided chest, chiseled and controlled midsection, and a lowly hanging hamstring. Phil also has that 3D effect in the arms and the delts that Nick lacks, which really doesn't allow him to compete after all, in my opinion. Now, while Nick may be one of the best currently in this shot, against Phil, his chest, the delts, and even the hamstrings get exposed big time. I'm a fan of Nick and the freak factor that he brings in this shot, however, there is no doubt that Phil smokes him in this pose. The rear double should be a no-brainer win for Phil, since he normally destroys anyone but Ronnie, Dorian, or Kai in this pose. That being said, this version of Phil was surprisingly flat compared to other years, which impacted his back's pop and wow factor the most. Now you can clearly see that he's ripped to shreds when it comes to the glutes and hamstrings, and his back clearly has that separation like an anatomy chart. However, he's missing that trademark 3D density. He may be beating Nick in the sheer thickness of the lower lats, traps, and mid-back. However, Nick looks wider in the lats, has pretty solid traps as well, I would say, and doesn't get destroyed in the limbs. If anything, I am more impressed by Nick's cable-like hamstrings and the ridiculous thickness each strand has, whereas for Phil, he has nice development and separation, but he lacks that sting. Arms are basically even, with Nick having the better bicep peaks and Phil having thicker forearms, and the delts are an easy win for Phil with all the striations and intricate lines. While this pose may be closer than I thought, or probably closer than any of you would have thought, I would still go with Phil for the superior back and more complete overall pose. The rear lat spread is basically the same story, with Phil winning once again. Here his back could be more pronounced and separated, something that could be influenced by the terrible lighting. However, I still think he showcases twice the density in the traps and lower back compared to Nick. He may not be as wide, however, the back truly pops and looks incredible in this pose. The legs are about even between the two, I would say, with Nick having more favorable lighting and some great hamstrings as well. I'm sure that Phil's hamstrings were on par, if not better than Nick's, since he had some of the best of all time. However, the lighting is just not doing him justice, and you really can't tell. The side tricep is a stellar shot for these two, and the upper halves are especially close. Both have great triceps with near-perfect insertions, tight controlled and detailed midsections, and thick, well-developed shoulders. Neither are posing to perfection, with Nick not locking his tricep out, and Phil lacking to fully cinch in that waist. However, I think they look just fine overall. That said, the reason I said the upper halves were the only close area is because Phil's, presentation of the side leg absolutely destroys that of Nick's. Look at the crazy cross striations in the side quad and glute, along with the almost grainy look to the skin. Ridiculous size and conditioning of the side leg, coupled with that phenomenal upper half, really makes Phil one of the best ever in this pose. Nick is certainly one of the best right now in the side tricep. However, next to Phil, his side leg, specifically the hamstring, is much, much smaller, and his upper body isn't as imposing. The ab and thigh is not the best pose for either guy, however, I think you can immediately see that Phil wins this one pretty handily. Better quads than Nick, especially in the size and thickness, the superior midsection when it comes to the abs and the oblique definition, and a decent enough taper. Yes, the video quality isn't the best for Phil, however, the overall pose looks complete from a silhouette standpoint, and he's only weak in the width. Now, Nick may be wider upstairs, but his width also includes that waist. His abs are experiencing continental drift as well, and the stomach really looks bloated and spilled over. The mediocre quads only contribute to his fridge-like upper half, which not only throws off the pose, but also would cost him the win. The last pose, the most muscular, is a really good pose to end off for both. They bring tons of freak factor in this shot, with Nick having the crazy details and tons of vascularity, and Phil bringing the bubbly three-dimensional look to the table. Immediately, my eyes are drawn to Phil for the round bubbliness of the arms and delts, and his massive quads, ripped chest, and great fullness are all very impressive. Nick also stands out to me mainly for the superior lighting and freakish details. However, his chest and quads aren't nearly as thick as Phil's. His quads aren't, really as important in this shot, I would say, as they were in others. However, they do still lack a bit of size and do draw your attention in a negative way. While both are good, I think that Phil looks a bit better because of the fuller arms and superior shape genetics. Anyways, I think this comparison showed me that Phil is clearly the better bodybuilder, and that my question to this had been answered. Phil obliterated Nick in almost every pose. However, I'm sure that a better version of Nick could tackle Phil in a more competitive way. With that said, if you enjoyed this video, a like and sub would be awesome, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.